Thank you, Andreas and Fernando, for sharing your knowledge with us. It's been a pleasure. And now for our next topic, let's talk about the risks and opportunities for education. Europe has a wide variety of educational systems. Some countries, like Finland and Estonia, are great examples of success. But now all countries face the uncertainty that comes with the pandemic. Does the virus affect all educational systems in the same way? Today, we are joined by Emilia Ahvenjärvi, Science and Education Consultant at the Finnish Embassy in Buenos Aires, and Rebecca Winthorpe, Main Researcher and Co-Director of the Center for Universal Education at the Brookings Institution. There are no better speakers to talk about risk and opportunities for education. Emilia, Rebecca, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Marta. It's great to be here today.
It's our pleasure.
Emilia, why don't we start with the question, big picture question of the role of schools today, given that we're in a very different world than we were 12 months ago. What do you think is the main role?
That's true. The world has changed everywhere. However, I would say that the main role, so the first responsibility of the schools remains the same as before, which is to assure equal opportunities for learning for all the students the schools are attending. And of course, we can think about this on a systemic level, like in Finland. This is the principle of our school system, but also in countries where maybe the education system is not the same throughout the country. We can think about this also at a school level. So each school can focus on the individual learning skills of their students and how to make or create the best possible opportunities for learning. And then I would say also that this connects very closely to the student well-being and the school community well-being, which is a huge and important issue right now at this moment. But Rebecca, what would you say about this?
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of an interesting question. I feel like some of the custodial nature of schools and the role they play in our communities of equalizing experience of children from multiple backgrounds is even more important right now, amid school closures and pandemics and lockdowns when people can't actually get out. And so I think we've seen around the world schools really stepping up to do feeding programs, coming together with really interesting partnerships with social protection agencies or organizations. So actually I would say the other thing that schools have been doing a lot more is really getting much better at engaging with families. They probably have always engaged with families, but didn't engage so deeply with each family. So you have teachers really getting to know what the different situations are of the families of the young people they're teaching. So I think those are all really important aspects to continue to do because of your last point about well-being.
That's right. I totally agree. In case of Finland, it has been also more difficult for our teachers and our schools to take care of their students or offer these equal opportunities for learning, as the situation in each student's home can be very different and vary a lot. But what about Rebecca? Well, we know that in most of the countries the instruction has continued, and in many places they are asking, like, but what should we teach now?
Mm.
I turn this question always to how to teach from what to teach, but I would like to know what your views on this.
I have sort of the same gut reaction. The how to teach is probably more important than the what to teach. But that said, if you look at how instruction has been continuing around the world, some of the poorest countries in the world, it's through radio, it's through WhatsApp messages to parents, it's through phone calls for teachers or facilitators to parents and putting the kids on the phone for maybe, once a week. It's through packets. In a lot of other places that have good internet connectivity and infrastructure, a lot of it is through online remote learning, through the wonderful Zoom that everyone has now used. And I think it's important for education leaders to remember or reflect or to think about how it's probably not the priority right now to get through the entire curriculum. Like, I think probably one should pick a couple of important things. Clearly, literacy and numeracy have to be central, and I would, suggest something in the arts and maybe something in the sciences, something like that. And then I totally agree with you. It would be around making use of the new terrain that students are in. They're no longer in a classroom with a group of students having to do everything at the same time as their peers. This is a super big shift and could offer, exactly like you said, Amelia, the how to teach canvas is very wide. There's some great examples in India, in rural villages, an organization called Pratham Texting parents little activities for kids to do every day. So things like count how many teeth your grandma has, count how many teeth this is early, young elementary, your dad has and your mom has, and like text it back. So there's fun, interactive ways to engage your whole household. We just did a survey, of a number of countries, a survey of parents, a survey from the Brookings Institution, and we'll be slowly putting this online. But across about 3 or 4 countries, including Buenos Aires and Argentina and the US and the UK, and Botswana and various other places, parents, number 2 way that they really appreciated helping kids learn was discussions and dialogue with their family members, over and above a lot of other things that education specialists are pushing out. So I think that's something for us to keep in mind. I mean, what do you think? You brought up the how, which that's a great example of a new how.
Yes. Well, first, I would say that this can be a great opportunity to strengthen the phenomenon-based approach to learning and the student-centered approach, as you just described. I think in those places where we have curricular flexibility and high level of autonomy of the teachers, and also strong participation of the students in establishing their learning goals and planning their learning processes. So those places are the ones that can more easily adapt to these new circumstances. And I would also mention the social aspect of learning, which we can't forget, even if we were in the middle of social distancing. So I think we really need to create opportunities for sharing knowledge and building knowledge together. And about Latin America, when we are talking about all the digital solutions and how this is a real digital revolution now, so I'd say that there are still so many places without proper connectivity or the technological devices or the knowledge to use all the EdTech solutions. So many other solutions, many other creative ways to reach the students and continue teaching have been very, very important and should be very much appreciated. So I think this also reminds that innovation and impact in education, it is not only about EdTech.
Yeah, I totally agree on that last part, but I know we might have another topic to move on to, but I think it would be helpful if you wouldn't mind, Amelia, talking a little bit about what is phenomenological teaching. Finland is the leader. You guys are the leader in this, and I'm not sure everybody around the world knows what exactly it means.
In many other places, inquiry-based learning is used as a synonym, or in Latin America, very often they speak about a project-based learning. But the most important thing probably in all these approaches is that we are learning from the phenomena that surround us, and that we create the learning processes in a way that they go overpass the limits of certain subjects and areas, so that we can create holistic knowledge, and that the motivation to learn this phenomena come from the learner, from him or herself.
Yeah. And one of the things that I always think about when I think about those sort of sets of innovative pedagogical approaches is how really difficult it is for teachers to teach that way. It's actually much, much harder and requires much higher level of skill, even if they might be doing less in terms of total control of the classroom. They need a higher level of skill to do it rigorously, for kids to really learn, to really be successful. So I want to ask you about teachers from your perspective. How do you think teachers are doing these days? And maybe it's a different answer for different regions of the world, but we certainly saw after the pandemic huge gratitude toward teachers when parents realized how difficult it is to teach their children at home right at in March, the month of the world's schools closed and went to remote learning. But how are teachers doing now? Is there still a great deal of appreciation and gratitude? Are our teachers feeling incredibly overwhelmed and unsupported? What's your perspective?
I'm sure there are experiences from the both sides, but I can say that there are thousands and thousands of teachers all over the world who have been doing an incredible work in switching fast to e-learning and distance learning, and trying to keep reaching their students and guiding their students with the means they had at hand. And so for sure it has been a really demanding and extremely difficult time for teachers everywhere. And I think there's certain loneliness of their responsibility. But as you say, there has been a big chance also to recognize teachers' work, and the surveys made in Finland show that during the distance learning, parents started to get to know and understand their own children better as learners. And through that understanding, they also started to appreciate even more the work of teachers and the schools. So I think this is a very, very positive outcome from this difficult situation. And in all times, but especially now, teachers need a lot of support and capacity building and time and flexibility to plan their work. And I'd also say that peer support is very important for them. overcoming these difficulties together. It must strengthen their work and their relationship.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I think that in many countries, teachers are not considered essential workers like doctors and nurses, and therefore aren't getting, when they're being asked to come back to school, not getting protective equipment, being in a group of, young people, not, maybe I think a lot of countries are trying to make schools really safe, but I think if we, classify teachers as essential workers and supported them as such, it would be very justified in terms of what communities need.
That's right. We already talked a little bit about the EdTech experience of these past months. Mainly, do you think the experience is positive, or what should we think about the blended learning approach?
Yeah, the $1 million question, right? So I think it's been very mixed. So I think a couple of things. I think right at the beginning, educators, school leaders, this past spring in 2020, when schools started closing, were desperate to figure out how to sustain remote learning, and basically grabbed everything they could get their hands on, and really ultimately fell into a couple of traps. This is what I've seen, at least, and supported by some really great colleagues like Richard Culata, who leads ISTE, who's this national and global network of teachers, that the main impetus was to use tech to pass content. So through Zoom, through Google Meetups, through Teams, whatever the method was, through television, et cetera, it was all about broadcast. Here's content. Like, what do we need to get kids? We need to get them content. And it's probably a terrible way to use technology. It's incredibly boring. We've all sat through very long, boring PowerPoint presentations in our work, if you work in an office. And, we're doing that to young people. I saw with my own kids, they just started sitting lower in the chair, and then eventually they were laying on the floor as I would cross paths, and it was sort of more Zoom lectures with PowerPoints and content. And so I think I'm hoping a lot of schools learned that's not a great way to use tech, although I could see that there might be a backlash in the long run. We tried tech, didn't work, and I would just say that's probably a bad use of tech. Technology is a tool. It can be used good, well or poorly. I do think that I'm hoping there's a lot more interest and creativity on how to use technology well, including, you could do fun things like, peers not only in your school, but across the city. You could do projects across schools easily in a way that you could never do in an in-person classroom. You could pipe in experts. If you're studying birds, you could find someone at a local zoo or even far afield. Doesn't even have to be in your little town if you don't have such resources, who could come in and talk to the kids. So you could use creative use of videos. I think the more that kids can create, for a class project, they could create a video and peers could critique it, etc. So there's definitely ways to use technology that could really amplify students' learning experience. And I think in the long run, teachers are going to be much more comfortable with technology and have had to canvass the wide range of stuff out there. It's been really hard for most teachers, I think, because especially in high-income countries, they've been inundated by everyone and their mother creating products for them, and it's very overwhelming. So I think my prognosis is that it will be transformative, but it isn't this. You might hear some in the technology sector saying, education will never be the same, just give kids laptops, it'll all be good, or have an app. That's never going to happen. It won't happen out of this, and it shouldn't, because education is very relational and human-centered, and technology should foster that. So that's my opinion. What's yours?
Thank you. I totally agree. about this way to use technology. So the first thing to keep in mind is the pedagogically meaningful way. If we just add more digital tools as a new layer on just traditional teaching methods, then I don't think it's serving the purpose really. And also, I think we should establish different criteria or think how blended learning approaches used for different learners and also in different age levels, because virtual learning and learning individually without having your teacher next to you supporting you all the time, it requires also a lot of self-direction.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, and this actually gets back to your question, your question about what should we be teaching at this moment. I mean, I think even less than the question of what are the curricular subjects, more the question of what, amid this sort of very tumultuous time, are kids going to be learning anyways, and should we nurture? And I think your point about student agency, self-direction, resilience, adaptability, those are incredible skills. We want our young people to have those skills when they graduate. They're going to need those skills to weather a world of increased climate change or economic duress or political instability or whatever, or just difficulties in their personal life that they will need to overcome. Those are good skills to have for themselves and for their communities and for their countries. So how can we make sure that technology can help foster that? That would be, I think, something for us all as an education community and the audience members in this conference to really think about, and that those aren't sets of competencies and skills that we should forget about if once we get a vaccine and the pandemic is over. Those are really important sets of competencies and skills that kids should try. We should try to help kids cultivate, no matter and what throughout their educational journey. And one of the things that this is about risks and opportunities, this session. One of the things that I see as a risk is education systems jumping into tech that might not help develop the full breadth of skills and competencies, but actually, take away learners' agency. We did a very large study a couple years ago on education innovations. We looked at 3,000 innovations around 160 plus countries, lots and lots in Latin America and Spain, and found that we looked at 1,500 ed tech innovations and found that about 80% of them were doing little more than just augmenting a paper and pencil, augmenting an analog non-tech approach. And so I think what I would hope comes out of this pandemic is that there's less of that and a lot more of the sort of 20% of ed tech interventions that we found that are really transforming and modifying what is even possible for young people to experience. That's something we put in our book, Leapfrogging Inequality, Remaking Education to Help Young People Thrive. So I think about it a lot in this day and age.
Yeah, this takes us again to the question of teacher competencies, which need to be upskilled so that the use of technology becomes really possible. And I would like to mention again the human connection. So the use of technology really needs to support also the learning together and being connected to others.
Speaking of that, Amelia, what about teacher collaboration? You just mentioned teachers. You talked about human collaboration. Teachers need human touch too, right? It's been a really hard time for teachers. They got into this because they love kids and learning, and they're far away and it's hard for them. So what have you seen? Have teachers increased sort of peer-to-peer collaboration? Do you think that's a silver lining that will come out of this?
Well, when asking to teachers in Finland as well as here in Argentina and, for example, in Chile, all of them have said that in the first moment it was like just figure out something, come up with a solution, and quite often in a very lonely way. But after some weeks, some months, kind of the school communities come back together and think about the solutions together and prepare for the whatever is coming next together. So from a first moment of maybe too much loneliness and individualism, I think there have been very good experiences of shared solutions and peer support. I could give here an example of peer support system we had already in place in Finland for the use of digital content in teaching, because even if Finland is very digitalized country, so in teaching there were still gaps, and the most impactful system has been a peer support, a digital tutor system for this. And during the pandemic, this has been highly valuable for all the schools, for the teachers and for the students. So I think peer support systems are one of the key aspects in teacher collaboration.
I've also seen, and I'm not sure if you've seen this too, sort of a parting thought here, that in a number of countries, teachers are just coming together on their own volition and starting things, and they came together early days and started things. This happened in Chile. It's happened in the UK, where a large group of teachers came together and put out a remote learning sort of set of content and materials, and governments have just taken it up. In Chile, there was stuff through the radio. In the UK, it was sort of an online school. And so I really have seen that given the space, teachers have been real leaders in figuring out how to address this. So it's a different, it's a form of collaboration, but I think it necessitates peer-to-peer learning. It hasn't just been one teacher alone. I don't know if you've seen that as well.
Yes, I think so, and I was also thinking that this collaborative way of teaching, when, for example, bringing two classes together for different subjects, that might be in some cases even easier when you don't have to look for a bigger place, for example, for the students, and you can organize this through the online tools. So even if there have been challenges, for sure there are new opportunities also for collaboration between teachers and collaborative learning.
I agree. It's been really lovely talking to you, Amelia.
You too. I think we could go on for a long time. There are so many interesting topics here, but I guess our time is running out.
Yes, thank you so much. This was very fun.
Thank you. See you again soon.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Bye.